Music. A particular form of isolation doesn't always present itself as obvious solitude. It's subtle, unseen. It conceals itself amid chuckles, amid efficiency, amid the excuse, music. I've been swamped these days, yet beneath the surface, a lingering discomfort persists. This isn't the solitude stemming from mere physical detachment, it's the isolation born from grasping that nobody truly understands you. That, should you vanish briefly, the majority wouldn't pick up on it until well after the fact. That in the face of something extraordinary or devastating occurring to you, you'd struggle to identify anyone to confide in. It's the sort of inner hush that builds gradually within, not boisterous, not frantic, but unrelenting. In time, it begins reshaping your mindset, the manner and music which you view yourself, the approach you take to navigating existence. Folks, music, frequently presume that individuals lacking companions come across as distant, reclusive, or apathetic. Music. Yet that's seldom the complete picture. At times, it's quite the contrary. Occasionally, they invest emotions too profoundly. Music. They perceive too keenly. They detect each tiny fluctuation in voice, each minor alteration in vibe, each forced grin that fails to light up the gaze, and eventually they begin to withdraw. Music. Not from disdain for others, but because forging bonds begins to seem perilous. From a mental standpoint, this ordeal reshapes music, the mind. When social ties remain absent for extended periods, your mind starts treating seclusion as music, a potential hazard. It activates the identical brain areas linked to bodily discomfort. That's precisely why isolation inflicts not only emotional distress, it genuinely causes physical agony. Your pulse varies. Rest grows more superficial. Your psyche begins hunting for risks in innocuous spots, since the human mind developed in communal groups, and prolonged aloneness once equated to a fatal outcome. Still, in the modern era, you might find yourself amid countless online presences and yet remain profoundly overlooked. For mere focus isn't bonding, and approval isn't closeness. Distinguishing between being acknowledged and being comprehended holds key. And that's an insight those without companions, music, grasp more acutely than most. The majority didn't select this route abruptly. It wasn't as if they arose one morning and music resolved a, quote, hard one. Typically, it unfolds gradually via minor letdowns that accumulate across the years. Music. You disclose something intimate and receive mockery. You entrust a confidence to another, and they wield music it harmfully. You attempt vulnerability, yet encounter misinterpretation, and in the end, your mind absorbs a harsh truth. It's wiser to abstain from effort. Thus, you cease extending overtures. You halt starting conversations. You begin convincing yourself that isolation suits you better. Initially, you may even accept it, as aloneness can offer tranquility temporarily. It provides command. It affords breathing room. Music. However, reality reveals that prolonged solitude shifts from restorative to tormenting. For fundamentally, people are built for bonds. Even the fiercest individualist yearns to be recognized, reflected, sensed through another's essence. But after years devoid of such, an odd transformation emerges, music, internally. Your inner monologue amplifies beyond external noises. You commence self-dialogue, silently in endless ruminations. You revisit past recollections, past music alliances, past disloyalties, pondering the points of divergence. At times, you fault yourself entirely. At others, you indict society, though usually it's neither solely. It's merely the intricate interplay of mental processes and human suffering. Psychology features a notion termed acquired interpersonal resignation. It arises when repeated connection attempts yield failures, prompting an instinctive halt to endeavors. Your mind links outreach with dismissal. Therefore, even encountering supportive, welcoming, empathetic individuals subsequently, your defenses linger. You may assure yourself solitude suffices, yet inwardly, a longing persists for that singular soul who comprehends without words, that individual needing no clarifications. Nevertheless, the deeper the desire, the more elusive it appears. Since isolation fosters a sense of undeservingness for companionship, it murmurs doubts like, "Bat quote too." It insists others prioritize differently, and progressively you internalize these notions. You preempt self-exclusion before external judgment arrives. You withdraw not from arrogance but from safeguarding. Yet remarkably, isolation doesn't invariably manifest as melancholy. At times, those sans friends seem utterly composed. They grin, they labor, they innovate, they even share upbeat images digitally. But inwardly, they inhabit dual worlds, the facade observable by society and the sentiment they harbor. They've crafted a self-image tailored for endurance, absent ties. But such an image frequently rings empty, as if observing their existence remotely. Judging those without friends proves simple, branding them as odd, aloofness, or just plain tough to connect with. Yet if you pay attention to the tales they share through their music narratives, a subtle vein of sorrow often emerges. Times when they poured out too much of their essence to folks who weren't willing to stick around. Gradually, that sorrow molds their whole sense of self. They start linking closeness to risk, openness to sorrow. Thus, they adapt by existing without it. Still, the price of such adjustment is steep. Without true companionship, your universe shrinks. Your feelings reverberate solely within your head. No one exists to question your views, no one to ease your inner dialogues. Experts in psychology note that extended disconnection from others can diminish compassion, not from a lack of concern, but from disuse in sharing emotions. Compassion resembles a muscle. Unused, it atrophies. Consequently, those enduring prolonged solitude may grow emotionally detached, not deliberately, but out of survival. It's the mind's mechanism for shielding against the ache of unfulfilled bonds. Paradoxically, though, those without companions frequently yearn for profound relationships more intensely than most. They ponder bonds with greater depth. They dissect them. They idealize them. They seek significance in every minor exchange, each fleeting grin. For rarity turns even the tiniest instances precious. Loneliness doesn't merely music influence your inner state. It reshapes your actions. Research indicates that long-term isolation heightens sensitivity to social signals. They scrutinize messages excessively. They infer apathy where it doesn't exist. They interpret unspoken intentions in plain words. After repeated dismissals or oversights, the brain hunts for evidence of rejection constantly, fabricating it where absent. This forms a vicious cycle. You turn guarded. Others perceive that reserve is aloofness. They conclude you're detached or chilly, withdrawing further, which deepens the isolation you're fighting. It's no one's blame. It's simply how the psyche guards against hurt. Even more intriguing is loneliness's impact on your sense of time. Without anyone to divide experiences with, moments drag on. Days merge indistinctly. You cease noting weekends or celebrations as they hold value only in company. Mental health specialists observe that isolation genuinely warps how time feels. Seconds stretch, hours weigh down. Disconnection traps you in your own reflections, apart from life's rhythm. Yet amid this quiet, something profound can arise. Solitude, when embraced mindfully, proves renewing. History's most insightful, innovative, and attuned individuals often embraced extended aloneness. The key lies in whether it's voluntary or imposed. Voluntary aloneness restores. Imposed aloneness toughens. One fosters self-reconnection, music. The other persuades you of unworthiness for bonds with others. For numerous without friends, music distinguishing between them remains murky. They claim in quote 3 or quote 4. Internally, though, they long for the spontaneous joy that blooms with someone who truly understands. The sort needing no forethought in words, the sort where quietness comforts rather than burdens. It's simple to overlook that companionship transcends mere hanging out. It's a reflector. It reveals facets of yourself invisible in solitude. Lacking it, gauging your progress or any evolution grows challenging since self-discovery doesn't occur in vacuum. It unfolds through others' gaze. Absent that gaze, music reality fades, as if drifting in mist where your presence lacks resonance. That's the subtle ache for those friendless, not mere isolation's sting, Music, but the sting of erasure, of being without observer. Still, under that ache simmers a remarkable compassion. Knowing erasure's bite, they perceive others sharply. Music. They spot the sidelined. They reach out subtly. Music. Because they grasp the weight of oversight. Perhaps that's loneliness's riddle here. The friendless often prove ideal companions. Music. If only others pause to notice them initially. A subtle shift arrives for those long steeped in isolation, realizing passive waiting may fall short. That perhaps, just perhaps, music recovery starts not with seeking others, but reclaiming the self, predating the hush. For authentic bonds flourish solely where self-trust already thrives. Music. If you doubt the importance of your own voice, you'll keep silencing it every time. If you view your desires as too much trouble, you'll consistently suppress them. And that's how the pattern persists. Invisible, overlooked, unvoiced. Folks without close companions tend to linger in the echoes of past encounters, times when they sense themselves as overly unique, music, excessively tender, excessively reflective amid the group nearby. Perhaps in childhood, they were the kids sketching alone in the corner while everyone else romped around. Music. Perhaps they embodied gentleness but lacked the volume to draw attention. Or perhaps their passions aligned with interests others ignored. Gradually, they turned that uniqueness into a shield, acting as if the sting didn't reach them, persuading themselves that solitude suited them better. Yet, uniqueness isn't the issue. It's the interpretation we give it. Music, growing up, misunderstood plants. The seed that something in you is flawed. You start trimming away parts of yourself. Music. You speak softer, sense shallower, anticipate milder, and before long, you've shaped a self that doesn't resonate even with those who could have cherished the authentic version. This psychological dynamic is profoundly innate to us. Our minds are built for inclusion, for clans, for collectives, music, for companionship. It's a primal drive for survival. But when inclusion turns risky, when each effort brings hurt, music, the mind adopts evasion as a defense. Evasion turns into a safeguard, music, and safeguard morphs into isolation. That's why so many isolated individuals appear composed externally. Their inner wiring has tuned itself to foresee dismissal ahead of time. They navigate life in perpetual self-control, music, striving to dodge excess or exposure. What escapes their notice is that the more they persist this way, the more they fade, not just from others' sight, but from their own awareness. It's akin to turning down your inner glow to evade the gaze of the unfit, only to find you can't draw in the suitable ones. Music. Experts in psychology often discuss social self-image, how you perceive yourself via the lens of others' presumed views. If years of dismissal or sidelining have marked you, that internal reflection warps. You presume universal judgment aligns with those past slights, and even amid genuine warmth from another, skepticism creeps in. You dismiss it as mere courtesy. Music. You probe their authenticity. That's the harsh irony of extended solitude. It doesn't merely distance you from people. It severs you from your capacity to trust in possible inclusion. Music. Yet consider this about our psyche. It can rediscover bonds. It's not fixed forever. Much like a muscle rebuilding its power, interpersonal faith can restore gradually via modest steps of bravery. Music. It begins with minor moves, returning a smile during eye contact, replying to texts without endless rumination. Music. Permitting yourself to agree despite the fear. It's not about manufacturing social ease instantly. It's about reopening to experiences, interaction by interaction. Music. After all, bonds aren't forged from flawlessness. They're born from being there, the readiness to appear flawed and genuine. What escapes many is that those steeped in prolonged solitude often possess profound emotional layers. They ponder intensely. They watch music discreetly. They've devoted years studying interactions from afar. Thus, music they grasp nuances others miss. They detect true intent. They sense vibe changes. They discern real warmth from staged gestures. That's why shallow ties seldom fulfill them. They yearn for substance, yet dread its demands. Music. So they erect barriers with peepholes. They seek ties but on guarded conditions, via reliability, steadiness, and quiet that comforts rather than voids. And such yearnings aren't excessive, they're utterly human. But a deeper reality lurks. Bonds demand openness, and openness terrifies after years of self-guarding. Music. You can't weave connections without bearing emotions, and that bearing resembles traversing a minefield shoeless after prior wounds. Countless steer clear entirely. They claim contentment in solitude, yet that's music, seldom accurate. They're merely weary of solo efforts. Still, here's the twist. Ceasing all attempts validates the dread that fueled your seclusion. You substantiate your own detachment. That's the mechanism sustaining solitude's hold. Music, not from inherent disconnection, but from the psyche's overwhelming fear of uncertainty. But picture bonds as rooted in truth, not showmanship. Picture companionship as something you permit, not pursue. In reality, those who truly sync with you won't demand a facade. They'll encounter you as you stand. They'll sense your stillness, not as a void CE, though it feels like depth. Often, the initial move isn't about making fresh connections. It's about mourning those past selves who put up with far less than they merited. The version that pleaded for notice. The one that took scraps and mistook them for affection. The one that muffled their own honesty just to hold on to proximity. As you mend those parts, a transformation occurs. You begin drawing others from a place of completeness rather than desperation. And that alters the landscape entirely. A peculiar liberation emerges when you cease pursuing individuals, music, and commence truly grasping your own essence. You come to recognize that solitude doesn't signal defect. It indicates you're poised for harmony. For companions who don't merely endure quiet but infuse tranquility into music it, for bonds that resemble effortless respiration, not staged acts. Solitude can serve as an instructor if you permit music it. It illuminates the caliber of companionship your spirit genuinely seeks. It uncovers the vibe you contribute to existence and compels you to cultivate an internal world so resilient that when suitable souls eventually emerge, you can greet them with music poise rather than anxiety. Here's a subtle reality. Those lacking companions frequently evolve into their finest witnesses. Music. They foster a level of introspection that eludes many. They invest moments in contemplation, inquiry, expansion. Music. And that profoundness forged in isolation turns out to be precisely what summons the appropriate sort of individuals, music, in time. The sort who perceive not only your current self, but the evolution wrought by all you weathered in seclusion. Music. Yet recovering from prolonged seclusion demands patience. You can't hasten it. You can't pretend. It commences with tender self-embrace, with practicing dialogue toward yourself as a compassionate ally would, when your thoughts declare, was, quote 5, respond, music gently, quote takes your, when inner voices murmur, quote 37 to counter with, quote 80 rip music, for your mind heeds such words, it adapts. Brain connections reshape via consistent practice, not sudden wonders. The greater your insistence on linkage, the more attuned you grow to perceiving it upon arrival. And it music shall. Since isolation isn't an eternal condition, it's a phase, a mental frost that yields to renewed vitality. Music, provided you embrace the descent. In essence, friendlessness doesn't diminish your humanity. Music, merely renders your narrative more subdued. But subdued tales hold immense potency. They, music, brim with creativity, personal revelation, and purpose. Among history's premier philosophers, authors, and innovators, music, lay those who endured extended solitude prior to discovering community. And upon doing so, their ties proved richer, savvier, more anchored, stemming from their prior mastery of solitary companionship. Thus, if you're navigating friendlessness at present, grasp this music fully. You're intact, you're valuable, you're merely amid your unfolding. Music. The universe hasn't overlooked you. It's awaiting your self-recollection. A time will arrive when you share space with another who regards you and declares, music, quote 9, In that instant, the epics of self-doubt will coalesce into clarity. You'll discern that aloneness was no penalty, it was groundwork. Each hushed evening, each ignored message, each unseen pang was molding you into someone capable of sustaining authentic bonds when they manifest. You'll cease yearning for multitudes and begin treasuring the exceptional. You'll halt the pursuit of validation and commence discerning auras, and you'll ultimately comprehend that companionship transcends numbers. Music. It's rooted in acknowledgement. It's that silent mutual gaze where two souls muse. Music, quote 10. And perhaps that's the purest form of alliance, not forged through endless chatter, but via understated empathy, shared tenderness from two spirits who've tasted isolation and resolved in unison to banish it henceforth. Since bonds aren't about flawless individuals, they're about genuine ones. Those who can dwell in your hush, chuckle at your flaws, and behold the splendor in your intricacies. Such souls merit the wait, and upon their arrival, you'll grasp the essence of true visibility. Not the facade you crafted for endurance, but the self you were destined to embody. In the interim, tread softly with your being, utter words of grace. And recall, even sans a companion at your side presently, your worthiness to be understood endures. Your eligibility for alliance persists. You're woven into humanity's unseen weave, linked perpetually, even in your most hushed instances. And perhaps, someday you'll encounter another once bereft of friends. You'll detect it in their gaze, that mirrored calm, that shared insight. You'll exchange smiles, and they'll reciprocate. And thus, two isolated realms will rediscover their link. Because loneliness is your story doesn't conclude here. This is merely the spot where the following chapter of your journey starts.